comes to sounding natural in American English pronunciation, a lot of students and people I meet are really focused on like fluency and speed and making everything sound connected, which is great. However, that's not necessarily going to be enough to get the natural sound you may be looking for. And in fact, at times can actually make it hard for people to understand you. And so today we're going to be looking at other things that we need to be considering besides fluency that'll help us achieve a more natural sound when we speak in American English. Good morning, guys. Good evening. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Schwa Mill. This is your American English pronunciation review show. We have people that send us files for review in a public free Telegram group. Okay, I pick two of them, and then we talk about them and give some reviews and things like that. So hopefully this will also help you, even if we're not looking at your specific files or if you haven't sent us anything. But if you would like to do so in the future, you can find a link to that free group in the description of things. And to guide you in all of this pronunciation review process, there is me. Hello. My name is Geoff. It rhymes with breath. That's one of the 4 keys to a natural sound in American English, including placement, pitch, breath, trying to weaken your consonant sounds. And we're strengthening your vowel sounds. We're also joined this morning by Cheyenne. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Apologies if I mispronounced your name. I have 2 clips again for us to be taking a look at. Let's begin with this first one. I'll play it twice. Think about what you think the feedback I'm going to give will be.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference examples.
Okay, let me play it one more time.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference examples.
Okay, so by the way, thanks to everyone who sent us files, because obviously it's hard to do a review show if you have nothing to review. So thanks to everyone who's been sending things. So a couple things that I've noticed about this file. The first thing that I will notice is that the breath and the connection between everything.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference examples.
You know, so one of the things that I really like about this is that every single syllable really feels linked together, and it feels linked together by the use of breath and airflow. Everything really is joined together pretty nicely here.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference examples.
You can read here at the end, for instance, as a reference examples. That's what I'm hearing. As a reference examples. You can hear that it's not as a reference versus like as a reference. Like everything's kind of linking together. Now, that being said, and Shane mentioned that they sent a video. Unfortunately, I didn't see the video. I have my 2 files for today, but do continue sending it. And if you forward it again, maybe you'll get selected next week. Because unfortunately, we can only look at 2 files at a time. Something I want to mention about this, though. So the fluency, I think, is very strong here. Things are really linked together. I like the breath work. And I think the breath work is helping keep the placement down. Some moments of this, I'll be honest, are a little bit tricky for me to understand. I want to try to figure out why that is.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference.
So, like, for instance, the following something of knowledge. There's a middle word there that I'm kind of losing.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference.
The following retrieved knowledge. The following retrieved knowledge. So like I get the of knowledge and I get following, but I'm not sure the words in the middle. And this is challenging. So why am I having a hard time understanding it? There's a couple of reasons why that may be occurring. Jose's here. He's saying it's retrieved. I appreciate you saying that. Let's see if I can get that.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference.
Is it retrieved? Like retrieved of knowledge?
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference.
If anything, if I feel like I'm hearing like the word retreat more than anything.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference examples.
Yeah, it's hard. So if you're in a situation like this, so imagine you're saying this, you're saying something similar and people aren't understanding. What can you do about this? The first place that I would start is I would try to give a little bit more space to the vowels. Okay, your listeners. Use the following retrieved knowledge. Okay, so since we have the words, use the following retrieved knowledge.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference.
So if it's retrieved knowledge, that, for instance, that D sound,
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference.
I almost feel like there's another. It sounds like there's a whole other vowel. It sounds like retrieve knowledge versus retrieved knowledge. So what could be happening is that linking from consonant to consonant sound. So retrieved ending on a D sound, knowledge starting with that N sound. It could be that held T sound is getting disrupted by a slight schwa sound. It's like retrieve knowledge versus retrieve knowledge. So notice how that D is going to slide into that N. Retrieve knowledge, retrieve knowledge, retrieve knowledge, instead of like retrieved a knowledge. So that could be the reason why I'm having some difficulty hearing that. Because even when you're telling me the word, I'm not hearing retrieve knowledge. Because that could be the first reason why that's not happening. The other things that could be happening. Hello to Let's Learn English. Good to see you. Let's Learn English. Some other things that can be helpful: lengthening your vowel sounds. Okay, so if you're not understood, lengthening your vowel sounds. Some other things that can be helpful: adding some greater pitch range and things like that. One of the things that's happening in this audio file in general.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference examples.
Like retrieve knowledge as a reference example. Like what's happening is we have a lot of these like kind of like relatively short thought groups, and every time the new thought group is starting, we're just returning back to the same pitch range more or less, and that can make comprehension over time a lot trickier. So I'll try to give an example of what it would sound like if you used a wider range of pitches.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference example.
Like use the following retrieved knowledge as a reference examples. Something like that. The following retrieved knowledge as reference examples. Like something like that. It's like increasing the pitch range, giving a little bit more space to the vowels. Playing around with firmness and softness. Surprisingly, by adding some softness, it actually can make things easier to understand.
Use the following retrieved knowledge as a.
It's like use the following retrieved knowledge. The following retrieved knowledge. So that would be some play with that would be an example of playing going from firm to soft to soft to soft and things like that. So yeah, Ashton, can I possibly drop the D on retrieve? That would change the grammar, right? If you take off the D, now you're in the present tense, or you're making it a verb, instead of turning into a participle as an adjective. So you can't really just take off the D. You can make it a held sound. You can make it held, but a held sound is not the same thing as just removing the D completely. You can't just use like a silent D. Okay. So hopefully that gives you some options there that would make that part a little bit easier to understand, and hopefully some strategies to use. If you say something that people don't understand it, hopefully some of those techniques that I just talked about there can be helpful. Thank you so much for sending that audio. Appreciate it. We're going to slide over to our second and final audio for today.
If I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book I could think of off the top of my head, like...
Okay, this is good. Let's play this one more time.
If I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book I could think of off the top of my head, like...
Okay, so again, this is another audio file where I think our fluency is high. We're able to kind of just keep things moving. Things are linked together with breath. If we compare this audio file to the previous one, I think one of the biggest differences is we have some greater elements of, we're seeing more contrast. We're seeing contrast with speed. Notice that we start slower and then kind of speed up.
If I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book I could think of off the top of my head, like...
So you can hear how the speed kind of changes. You can also hear, again, we start high and then kind of work our way down in pitch. Okay. And it's also very fluid and connected. One thing that can happen is that, well, let me play the audio again, then we'll talk more about it.
If I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book I could think of off the top of my head, like...
So some things that can happen is we have to be mindful a little bit of vowel sounds. American English listeners in general are pretty sensitive to vowel sounds. Every language has this thing that's focused on. Some languages focus on vowels, some languages focus on consonant sounds. American English is really focused on vowels. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that There's a moment here where we're using a different vowel than would be expected. Play again.
If I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book that I could think of off the top of my head? Like,
Okay, I'm hearing it, for instance, at the end there, like think off, think off, think off, like so. That is almost turning into like an ah sound versus generally your listeners probably going to be listening probably more for a schwa sound, like think of, think of, think of, or think of, think of, think of. You know, you can play around with the consonant sounds a bit, but you can't really play around with the vowel sounds too much. So we have to be really careful. You know, if even if we have like really fluent speech and we're keeping things moving and we're using pitch ranges and other elements of contrast, if we use the wrong vowel sound, that potentially could throw off a listener. Okay, so watch out for that. So again, it's not think off as much as it's think of, think of. So watch out a little bit for that. The other thing too is that I mentioned that this audio file is using a lot of elements of contrast, but I think that particularly applies to maybe like the first half of this audio. Notice what happens in the second half of this audio.
if I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book that I could think of off the top of my head?
Like as soon as we get to that like I don't know part, we shift over too fast, which is great. But then we kind of just linger there. Everything is fast. And there's no moments to kind of break up that speed.
If I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book that I could think of off the top of my head?
Like I don't know what's the longest book I could think of off the top of my head. Like that part. I think if returning back to some of the things we were doing earlier, where we were mixing up the speed, if I were to write, which is a little slow, a really long, she's even slowed down a little bit more there, right? Whereas that ending part is just doing speed, 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 speed. Having even just a moment there where there's a pause or we slow down a little bit, you know, just something to kind of break it up, because right now the way this is, things can get a little bit lost. Okay, so whenever the biggest lesson I think from all the audio files today is that whenever you find yourself in some sort of a pattern, break it. Like what we need to do is like we need to find the pattern, then we need to break the pattern. So find the pattern, break the pattern. Find the pattern, break the pattern. Find the pattern, break the pattern. In this case, if we just know that we're using speed, a lot of short syllables and things like that, you know, adding a pause. To give an example, what if we added a pause in this?
If I were to write a real long novel, like, I don't know, what's the longest book that I could think of off the top of my head? Like,
I don't know, what's the longest book I could think of off the top of my head? Like even just a little break there or something like that. Or playing around with speed. What's the longest book I can think of off the top of my head? Just something like that. Because it disrupts the pattern and it allows people to connect things a bit more. Okay, so those would be my biggest suggestions for the audio file. Watch out a little bit for that schwa sound, and in the second half of that audio, adding some more contrast. Okay, Livy is here. Great to see you. Livy also has something to say, so we'll give him a moment to say it. It's excited to see. And we have a question about, so when, like I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, if you have audio that you would like us to review on a future episode of the Schwa Mill, because again, every Schwa Mill episode we're looking at about 2 files, you're welcome to put them into our free Telegram group. Again, there is a link in the video description where you can find that. Unfortunately, just by posting things, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that we will look at them. You know, you're welcome to forward it over and over again, and it might get selected. So I can't guarantee that all. Well, I can guarantee that all the files that are posted in the group, unfortunately, won't get reviewed. But if you are someone that you want to guarantee feedback for yourself, we do have a Telegram group for that, a more official one, where I give feedback to students every day. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, and you're like, hey, I know that on the streams you're only looking at 2 files per stream, Geoff, but I want to get feedback from you every single day of the week, Monday through Sunday. Then you can go to fluentamerican.com/Telegram. So that's the official Fluent American Telegram group where, again, people send in files. I look at the files and give you feedback, and generally within 24 hours. It's me and my assistant. Okay. It's just a note. And again, thanks to everyone who's been sending files and videos. It's great. Livy says, I think before working on pronunciation, we got to be fluent already to be able to communicate. What do you think about that? I think that this will probably be our last note for the day before I head out. Look, a lot of people, Livy says it's useless to sound American and not be able to speak. or any language you're studying, right? So if I had to answer that question right now, what I would say is that a couple of things. When we learn a language, how are we judging people in terms of their language ability? It's like if someone tells you, hey, I speak a language, and you're like, oh, okay, say something. The reality is that when they talk, you're probably not really judging them based on their grammar, and you're probably not really judging them based on their vocabulary. The thing that's probably going to stand out the most to you is their accent. Like even just the way they say one word, even if the way they just say like hello or something like that, already conveys a lot of information about, oh wow, this person sounds, how sounds really good or doesn't sound very natural or things like that. So I think pronunciation is one of the greatest barometers people use to determine fluency or how natural someone is in a language. Now, it's not really fair because a lot of times, if you learn a language in school or something, or just watching videos, a lot of times the emphasis is on grammar and vocab and stuff like that, and less on pronunciation. And most of the people who study pronunciation have already studied the language for years. Most of my students, are living or working in an English context, or they've surrounded themselves with a high degree of English. Okay. So I do think it's common for people to not start targeting pronunciation until later. I don't personally like that strategy because, so here's the thing. If you work on becoming fluent first, you're achieving that fluency by creating a system of pronunciation that doesn't really have a foundation. It's an approximation of what you think it is. But there's things that aren't natural sounding, right? And the problem is that, again, a lot of my students are coming to me after speaking and using English for years. So let's position this another way. Let's imagine that you what's an example that I can use? Let's say that you want to get into art. Let's say you're an artist. You draw. You've never taken drawing classes. And so for years you draw people, but you've never studied like anatomy. You've never studied proportions, like your arm needs to be this long, your nose needs to be this long, your ears need to be this. Like you've never studied any of that before. You've just drawn on your own. Okay, and you've done that for years. Versus you have another person who just starts drawing and they had never drawn before, and they get a teacher or resources to start focusing on drawing bodies from the beginning. The entire time they're learning to draw bodies, they've always had someone to guide them, like, no, your proportion's wrong on this, you need to have this, so who's going to have the easier time after 1 year? I think that the first person who drew bodies for years without guidance, then it's going to take them, if they've drawn for 8 years, maybe by year 9, that last year they got help with bodies and they got okay. But then that first person who got guidance from the beginning, just on drawing how to draw like the human body, they could probably draw a pretty good human body after 1 year, right? So, yeah, I mean that the person one, they've taken their art to another level. They've probably became a good artist on their own, just being self-taught, and now they know another thing. But that first person might be able to catch up to them in a shorter amount of time, and more accurately, and they don't have to worry about the things that they've learned incorrectly, right? Because that's the thing, is that that first artist who's been drawing bodies for a really long time has to not only learn how to draw bodies, but also has to unlearn all the bad habits. Like, oh, I've always been drawing heads like this. That was the wrong way to draw heads. I need to draw heads like this. So I need to forget how I learned to draw the body and then learn this whole new strategy for drawing the body. Whereas the second artist never had the bad representations and things like that. From the beginning, they've been able to incorporate correct proportions, and correct body parts and things like that, you know? And I think for pronunciation, the hard part about pronunciation isn't the pronunciation. The hard part is the unlearning of the system. Because if you've already spoken English for a very long time, you've already developed habits and systems that you use for pronunciation. In those systems, by the time you come to me, now we have to unlearn those and then relearn a new system. Whereas if someone comes to me from the very beginning, even if they're a very beginner, we can immediately start off with a system that's sound, that's based on how the language operates, without creating the false and incorrect systems. So I don't know. I would much rather. What I've told students before is if I were learning another language, I would probably just spend. Livy says most of us are artists normal. Exactly, I know, and I'm the same way too. It's the same for me. Like with Italian, I didn't think about pronunciation until I was much farther along, right? And so that's how I'd approach it. And I think from the very beginning, it's worth spending time on pronunciation. If I were to learn a language, I think before I learned words or before I learned grammar, I'd probably just spend 1 to 2 months just doing pronunciation stuff. Even if I didn't understand what I was saying, I would just do pronunciation, just develop my ear, get the sounds generally correct, get an idea of what's the music, the languages. But that's just me. All right, guys, I do need to head out. But hey, thank you so much for hanging out with me. We'll be back next week again. Hopefully, we'll be at a time that's a little bit more regular. I know this week's been kind of wild, but it should be easier. Next week, I will keep you guys posted on that. Shannon asks where you're. I have no Italian in me. It's just a language I was studying. It's just like a lot of you here. I'm guessing you guys learn English, but I'm guessing you're not American. It's kind of the same thing for me when I was learning Italian. So it says, in school they teach you to approximate Spanish vowels, but never teach you how to make the short, long vowels, which involves other sounds, which I feel like it would start with this. Is this for... I don't know the context there. Is this for a Spanish speaker learning Spanish and English speaker learning Spanish? Yeah, a lot of... And also we have to understand a lot of teachers aren't well-versed in pronunciation themselves. A lot of them are grammar teachers or vocab teachers, but haven't spent a lot of time teaching pronunciation. Just like a baby. Yeah, just like a baby. I mean, look, it's not very fair in education, like language education, because for a baby, when a baby learns a language, they start listening when they're inside the mom in the womb. They start listening to the language. And they're not expected to start talking until they're about, like 2 years old. And even then, it's like short sentences, very short. So they just spent 2 years just listening. But for an adult, we throw them in the classroom and we expect an adult to start talking the very first day that they learn a language. Like, it's not fair. Kids have 2 years just to listen. Adults have 1 day. Yeah, this is not very fair. I know that kids are positioned as these incredible language learners and things like that, and they have some advantages to be sure, but adults have some advantages too when it comes to language learning that kids don't have. Anyways, we can talk more about that later. I hope you guys have a good weekend, have a good day, have a good night. Thanks for hanging out with me at the Schwa Mill. You guys take care. Send us more pronunciation files in the Schwa Mill Telegram group, or if you want feedback every single day, then check out our group at fluentamerican.com/telegram. Thank you guys. Take care.